I found them on a Tuesday. It's always a Tuesday in stories like this, when everything you think you know cracks open like an egg and spills its filthy contents across the floor. The letters were hidden in a small wooden box tucked beneath the false bottom of his desk drawer. If I hadn't been searching for a pen, I would never have found them. At first, I didn't want to read them. It felt like opening a wound before you're ready to bleed. But the paper, thick and heavy, smeared with ink and desire, was already begging me to touch it. My fingers shook as I unfolded the first page, and then I read.
And read.
And read. Her words dripped off the page like honey, sweet and sticky, but bitter too, like the truth had spoiled before it was confessed. I dream of you at night. I dream of your mouth, your hands, your body, everything your wife doesn't know how to touch. There was no name. He was only my love or my darling in her cursive scrawl, as though she was afraid to write his name and make him mortal. I sat there in his study, alone and shaking, the letter pinched between my thumb and forefinger like a snake. The bile rose in my throat, and for the first time in my life, I knew what rage tasted like. It tasted like copper and salt, like blood. I didn't confront him. Confrontation would have made me small. That's what women do when they find themselves betrayed, isn't it?
They yell.
They cry. They throw dishes or smash mirrors. And then the man gets to tell himself it's her fault, that she's hysterical, unreasonable, unhinged. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, I sat in his study for an hour, reading every letter. There were at least 20 of them, neatly folded and tied together with a black ribbon, a fucking ribbon. The kind of thing a man keeps when he's pretending he's living in a French novel, when he imagines himself the tragic hero of his own sordid little love affair. The letters were erotic, vividly so, filled with details about their encounters, stolen afternoons in anonymous hotel rooms, hurried whispers in dark corners, his hands on her hips, her mouth on his throat. But the details that stung most weren't about sex. They were about me. The way she described me. I saw her at your party last night. She looked bored, fragile, like a paper doll you've outgrown. I sat back in the chair, holding the letter close to my face, as though proximity would make it hurt less. A paper doll. A wife with paper skin and paper bones. And he had let her say it, had let her turn me into nothing more than a shadow in their story. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, smoking one cigarette after another, staring at the empty page of a notebook I kept in the bedroom. When the sun began to bleed across the sky, I finally picked up a pen. And I wrote, "Dear bitch." The words came easily after that, sliding across the page like warm oil. I told her what she didn't know, about the man she thought she loved, the man she thought belonged to her. I told her about the way his stomach rolls when he laughs too hard, about how he cries after sex when he's drunk enough to forget he's supposed to be a man. I told her about the way he once begged me not to leave him, about the nights he whispered my name like a prayer. I didn't hold back. I wrote it all. The beautiful, the ugly, the raw truth of him. You think you've touched him, that you know him? You don't. He's an actor, and you're just another audience member. He loves the applause, but when the curtains close, I'm the one who sees him. I'm the one who cleans up the mess he leaves behind. When I finished, I felt something I hadn't felt in years.
Alive.
Like the ink on the page had resurrected me from the dead. I didn't sign the letter. There was no need. I tucked it into an envelope, sealed it shut, and addressed it to her. I didn't know her name, but I knew where to send it. I'd found the hotel receipt in his coat pocket weeks earlier, with a room number scrawled on the back in the same delicate handwriting. She had been sloppy, but I was sharper. I dropped the letter in the mail that afternoon, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The second letter came a week later. I don't know what I expected. Silence, maybe. Or rage. A response filled with indignation or threats. But when I opened the envelope, her words punched through my ribs and lodged themselves in my gut. I know everything you're telling me, and still, I can't stop. I think I hate him too. I read the letter 3 times before I believed it. I had written to her like a woman sharpening a knife, ready to fight for blood. And instead, She had put down her weapon and stepped into the ring beside me. The letters began to flow between us like a river, swift, dark, and full of secrets. We didn't speak of our names or our lives. It didn't matter who we were outside of those pages. What mattered was the ink, the confession of our mutual hatred for the same man. I told her things I had never told anyone, things I had never even admitted to myself. I wrote about the nights I had lain awake next to him, staring at the ceiling and imagining a world where I could leave. I wrote about the way he looked at other women even when he thought I wasn't watching, about the feeling of being invisible while standing right next to him. There's a kind of freedom in hatred, I wrote one night. When you finally let yourself hate him, you let yourself exist without him. Her letters were shorter, but no less sharp. She told me about the way he had lied to her, too, how he had promised her things he never delivered. She told me how he liked to talk about me when they were together, as though I were a ghost haunting his every move. It wasn't just you, she wrote. He made me feel small too. He made me feel like I was nothing more than a reflection of his desire. Some nights, I would sit at my desk and run my fingers over the pages of her letters, feeling the ridges where her pen had pressed too hard. There was something intimate about it, knowing that somewhere, miles away, another woman was sitting alone and writing to me. She wasn't my friend. She wasn't my enemy. She was something else entirely, something new, something raw and real. And together, we began to plot. The letters between us grew darker, sharper. Her words became more venomous, and mine grew bolder. We were two women sharpening our knives on each other's pain, feeding off the rawness of our hatred for him. But hatred, as I've learned, can be creative. It isn't just destruction, it's transformation. He lies to us both, she wrote in her last letter. Why shouldn't we rewrite his stories? That's when we began to plot. We didn't meet in person, not at first. There was something sacred about our distance, the anonymity of our shared hatred. I imagined her sitting at a desk like mine, the light dim, a cigarette burning to its filter as she scratched out each word in her scrawl. I imagined her just as hollowed out as I was, just as eager to fill the void with revenge. When the plan took shape, it was simple, elegant even. Revenge doesn't need to be theatrical, it just needs to cut deep. He thought he was the one pulling the strings, whispering his desires into her ears while feeding me just enough scraps of affection to keep me tethered. But we knew better. We were the ones holding the blade now. It began with the money. Men like him. Men who juggle wives and mistresses, who tell lies as easily as they breathe, think they're invincible. They think their worlds will spin forever because no one will dare stop them. But men like him also have blind spots. She knew things he'd never tell me. Where he kept cash hidden, his offshore accounts, the safe in his office with the combination scribbled on a scrap of paper under the blotter. She'd spent hours listening to him talk, watching him peel off his mask one layer at a time until he thought he was bare and unguarded. It turns out even men stripped naked still carry secrets in their pockets. I started small, a few thousand gone here and there, just enough to rattle him without tipping him off completely. I'd watch him at dinner, his brow furrowed as he pushed food around his plate, clearly preoccupied. Long days? I'd ask softly, savoring the irony of it. Work stress, he'd mutter. He was unraveling, thread by thread, and I enjoyed every second of it. When we finally met in person, it felt inevitable. She suggested the cafe, a quiet place tucked into a forgotten corner of the city. I arrived first, sitting near the window where I could watch the rain smear itself against the glass. She walked in 10 minutes later, and I recognized her immediately. She was beautiful, of course. Dark hair, dark eyes, an elegance that felt sharp-edged rather than soft. But she wasn't the villain I had imagined. There were no smug smiles or haughty glances. When she looked at me, it was like looking in a mirror. Both of us fractured, both of us transformed by the same man. She sat down without a word. For a while, we just stared at each other. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't awkward. It was full of understanding. I didn't know what you'd look like, she said finally, her voice low, her fingers tracing the edge of the coffee cup. And what do you think? She smirked. I think you're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. And you? Her eyes flashed. I think he underestimated me too. We talked for hours after that. About him, about us, about the mess we were now unraveling together. I learned how he'd spun her the same lies he used on me, how he called her his real love, how he promised her freedom from a life she didn't even know she was trapped in. He had painted her as his escape, while I was his cage. What a joke. But now, we were both free. Free and dangerous. The final act came together quickly. She called him on a Wednesday night, his usual late night at the office. She told him she wanted to meet him somewhere special, a place where they could be alone, away from the world. A hotel room, room 613. He didn't question it. Men like him never do. They think they're untouchable, always 5 steps ahead, too clever for the women they pretend to love. But when he walked into the hotel room that night, it wasn't her he found. It was us. I'll never forget the look on his face. For a moment, he was frozen, like a man staring into the mouth of an open grave. His gaze flicked between me and her, the wheels in his brain turning desperately as he tried to process what he was seeing.
Sit down, I said.
My voice was calm, steady, like I was offering him a drink instead of preparing to burn his world to ash. What the hell is this? He sputtered.
Sit. Down.
He sat. The room was small, claustrophobic. Just a bed, a chair, and a desk. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, staring at him like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. I don't understand, he said. His voice was shaking. What's going on here? You lied to us both, she said. Her voice was harder than mine. There was no softness left in her, no room for pity. But you're not lying anymore. I pulled the stack of letters from my bag and dropped them onto the bed. The ribbon was gone now. I'd burned it. Recognize these? I asked. His face went white. And these, she added, pulling out a stack of bank statements. Funny how quickly secrets unravel, isn't it? He looked from her to me, his mouth opening and closing like he was struggling for air. You did this together? Yes, I said. And we're not done yet. What we did to him next wasn't violence, not the kind you could see anyway. We didn't need knives or fists to destroy him. We had truth. The letters, the bank records, the emails and receipts. All the little things he thought he'd buried so carefully, we laid bare. His colleagues, his clients, his friends, we showed them everything. And his world fell apart. I heard later that he'd lost his job, that his accounts had been frozen, that his friends had turned their backs on him. He moved out of our house a week later, leaving behind nothing but his suits and his liquor cabinet. I wasn't there when he packed. I didn't need to be. The last time I saw her, we were sitting in the same cafe where we'd first met. She looked lighter now, like someone who had finally shrugged off a heavy coat she'd been carrying for years. Do you think he'll ever forgive us? She asked, smirking over the rim of her coffee cup. I laughed. I don't care if he does. She nodded. Me neither. We didn't toast to our victory because it wasn't really a victory. It was something else, something messier, darker. We weren't heroes, and he wasn't a villain. We were just people who had torn each other apart and then stitched ourselves back together with the scraps. But I'll say this. The next time someone calls me fragile, I'll smile and think of him, sitting alone in the wreckage of the life he built on lies. And I'll know that I was never the paper doll he thought I was.